Hey everyone, this is Steve Good, and welcome back to the Coin Chat Part 2 episode for Dummies with Chas.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. That's kind of a perfect lead-in to this next kind of group of questions, which I think is the good stuff, because I'd love to be able to use this.
You've been making me wait all this time for the good stuff? Oh, come on, you're killing me again, man.
Yeah, that's the whole lead-in.
So this is where the entertainment starts for everybody now. So ready, set, go.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, here we go. We're ramping up to the fun stuff now. All right, I'm ready. Let's go. Rapid fire, 5 seconds per question. Let's go.
Yeah, well, I'd love to be able to use this and say, because being kind of a beginner, and I'm a believer, but I'm a beginner, and so I hear things and I get so excited about it, and then I start talking to other people about it, and they're like, oh yeah, but what about this, and what about this, and the skeptics come out, and I don't know enough to be able to explain it to them. So I'd love to be able to say, well, just listen to my episode of Crypto for Dummies. So what I'd love to do is just fire, like you said, I'll just quick fire like a bunch of major objections that people have.
Okay.
And then you can give answers from an expert point of view.
And I can give really defensive, responses that are completely unhelpful then.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, here we go.
Make sure there's
belligerent Steve is on. Here we go.
Yeah. So what would you say to somebody that said that Bitcoin is just a big bubble? Like the housing bubble, that when creditors started giving loans to just anybody, and then it burst because everybody was coming on board, and no one could afford it. So like exchanges now are allowing credit cards to purchase Bitcoin. And that kind of thing. So what would you say to somebody that said that Bitcoin's a bubble and it could burst and everybody could be left standing in the dark?
Well, I mean, it's always an interesting discussion point, because everything goes up and down. You could argue that the many of the stock markets around the world are probably also overly inflated and too high, which would define them as a bubble. But we have to remember that less than 1% of the world's population is even on Bitcoin today. So I suppose if we got to 10%, that might be more of a concern. Or if some sort of major government regulatory things took place that shut down all the miners so that mining couldn't take place anymore, that would cause the whole, the whole thing to stop. And of course, trillions of dollars would be lost in the process. But to say it's a bubble is probably more so because it's run up and very quickly. But we have to remember that the total supply of Bitcoins that will be minted in total is only 21 million coins. So because the supply is low and the demand is high, it's just economics from where I'm sitting, which says, high demand, low supply. It's going to go up faster than if you take an Ethereum that has a far higher number of coins and may or may not have the same demand. But let's assume the demand were the same. The speed in which it accelerates and goes up won't be the same. So we have to bear in mind a little bit of the supply-demand side of it. Now, it's true that suddenly Bitcoin has become more popular and become more recognized, and it's becoming part of our social conscious. But the more people are conscious of it and the more people want to start getting involved with it, of course it's going to drive the prices up for a sustained period of time. And there will be periods where people get freaked out or they get scared and say, oh my God, it's run up so much. And, it's going to go up and then it's going to come down. But I wouldn't say that it's, an outright bubble in that sense, because it's the beginning of a completely new paradigm in the way we operate and transact. So, and, Bitcoin's not the only coin. There's lots of other coins out there. So, like anything, there's going to be ups and downs, but it doesn't feel to me like it's bubbly yet. It feels like there's just a lot of people saying that because they don't really understand what's going on. And it's an easy way to kind of dismiss uncertainty and change when they don't really know what's going on or understand the economics of why the coin has gone up so frequently, especially when you look at supply and you look at total number of people involved. And I think those are two major factors that are what's driving up the coin price of Bitcoin in particular.
That makes sense. So let's say there was a doom and gloom scenario, like you mentioned, like the government regulated mining or something like that,
right?
Or let's say, just hypothetically, there was a bubble. What's the best and worst case scenario if that happens?
So If governments all want to, and first of all, so let's just start by saying there's a lot of governments who have already regulated Bitcoin in the positive, saying it's legal tender, legal currency, and it's valid for use. So, countries like Sweden, Estonia, the Ukraine have all begun to use it for various purposes. Belarus has just made it a valid legal currency that's going to be tax-free for 5 years if you're doing business or trading in it. Japan is widely using it as a standard currency. So, there's something to be said that already it's in use, that is unlikely to be shut down when governments are already encouraging its use by legalizing aspects of it. And that's only Bitcoin. There's a whole range of companies that are part of what's called the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance that are all encouraging the use of Ethereum for transacting contracts between each other electronically using Ethereum. So that's already happening, and it's continuing to grow. And by the way, JP Morgan's part of that. So while, our friend Jamie Dimon says Bitcoin's a fraud, he's still a part of the Ethereum Alliance. So maybe it's just Bitcoin that he has a problem with. And the only real way I could see that Bitcoin would be completely stopped, or any currency for that matter would be completely stopped, would be that you'd have to stop every mining operation globally. And that's not so easy because you have to know where they are. And because you can mine from home, or you can mine from mining operations in China or Iceland or India or other places, it makes it pretty hard to just make the whole thing disappear. So even if people were told it stopped, how do you stop people from doing it when it's still being mined and still being minted and still being traded?
Right. So the price. So when I say what's the worst case scenario, I mean let's say something like that happened, then the value of the Bitcoin would plummet, right?
Yeah.
So if you had,
so put it this way, if the Nasdaq, let's just put it this way: if I said to you, is there a possibility that Microsoft could ever be zero? Your response would be
no.
Why not?
Just because it would, but the difference there is
belligerent Steve now. I told you I was going to be belligerent. So why can't Microsoft be zero? Of course it could be zero. Do you know how it could be zero?
They'd have to go bankrupt, and you would know.
Or how about if the U.S. decided to shut the Nasdaq down and said, or shut down all trading on Microsoft and said, Microsoft is just, you can't trade it anymore. So people would be sitting there with all these shares of Microsoft, and they'd be stuck with a bunch of shares that are effectively now worthless, even if the coin or shares were trading at whatever price, trading at $100 or $150 per share. It wouldn't matter. If you can't trade it, it's worthless.
Right.
So the same thing would go with Bitcoin.
With Bitcoin.
What's that?
Well, so what happens if the government does that with Bitcoin?
Well, so that's my point. How are they going to do that with Bitcoin? Because they'd have to shut down something like 100 exchanges. And of course, as I said, some countries are already making it legal and others are not. So you'd have to have a global initiative for all countries around the world to collectively agree to shut down all exchanges, all mining operations, and anything and everything else crypto. And one thing that's great about humankind is we're resilient. When people try to stop us from doing things, we always find loopholes and other ways to do it. So somehow, I can't really imagine that the governments that we elect would really be able to just shut it down outright when we could just turn around and re-elect people that we believe are going to encourage the things that we're trying to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that, a lot of people would agree that crypto is the future. I think what people get nervous about is whether they should buy into something like Bitcoin when maybe potentially the government could create their own cryptocurrency, or another cryptocurrency could become more prevalent or popular, or something could happen and shut down that Bitcoin or that one particular currency that they bought into.
I would say that national currencies are probably more at risk than cryptocurrencies. And I've talked about this on a previous episode, but I'll just mention this briefly again now because it's interesting. So, when you look at global trade, for example, between China and India, they don't exchange goods and services between each other, exchanging between Chinese and Indian currencies. They actually trade on US dollars. Now, of course, that's not very efficient because they're having to exchange money all the time back and forth and having to actually hold USD in order to trade between each other. So there are a number of initiatives going on for countries to launch either block-based, and by block I mean a group of nations that will create a block currency that they can use to counter the usage of the dollar, or there are single nations that are doing the same thing. So Estonia is talking about launching the Est coin as a means for being able to let people operate and run in Estonia quite freely using their coin. And of course, no surprise, the European Union is against it, saying, if you do this, we'll throw you out of the European Union. But Estonia is making more money by creating an e-residency program and enabling a global interaction of company formations and transactions than most other countries in Europe. So they probably don't really care. And equally, there's the BRICS nations of Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, which are investigating creating the BRICS currency. Now, if the BRICS cryptocurrency takes hold, then what you'll find is they'll no longer use the US dollar. So now you're starting to see the US dollar become less and less valuable to people because they start trading on other types of cryptocurrencies. So I think there's going to be a lot more that falls out or shakes out of this, whether it's a Bitcoin issue, that maybe Bitcoin is not the underlying currency of the future. Maybe it is. Then there's going to be block nations creating cryptos. I think there's a lot more that we just don't know yet about how things are going to work. And then there's other things happening like, Ripple that's creating interbanking transactions between the Bank of Japan and the Bank of Thailand and creating banking transactions for American Express. And they're all basically replacing the use of US dollar as the primary currency that's used around the globe. So I think it's going to be more interesting to see how crypto starts to replace national currencies, and we start to look at what does the world look like in 5 years' time, relatively speaking. And for me, this is like, oh my God, where's this going? I have no idea. I can only guess.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. And I think for dummies like me, it's important to make that distinction between talking about crypto and talking about Bitcoin, because like you're saying, crypto is a global thing,
phenomenon,
and it's a global phenomenon. It's a global thing that can't really be affected because it's not an actual physical thing. It's technology, it's how things are being done, and that will continue to evolve. Bitcoin is a totally different argument because you can say, okay, well, maybe something could happen with Bitcoin, and it could change the value, or it could go to zero, or it could be replaced by something or whatever. But that's a totally different conversation.
Yeah, completely. Right? Yeah, absolutely.
That's interesting. And I think very important to note. So let's say I'm buying and selling things using crypto, and this is probably a really common question too. I'm buying and selling things using crypto. I'm trading currencies. Now, how do I know what's going to happen with taxes?
Well, it's an interesting question because I'll give you a really good example of the complexity of the problem. And I've actually seen that even the UK and the US are treating tax differently. And then, of course, I mentioned that Belarus is now doing 5 years for free. So there's already 3 examples I can see in terms of how tax is treated. But here's an example of where it gets weird. So let's just say that I were to buy, and I did this recently. I bought 650 coins for an ICO from a project called Change Bank based in Singapore. And one Ether was buying 650 coins. And what's happened is that the value of the exchange rate from Ether to the change coin to USD at the time was 46 cents. And now the coin is up, to, let's say, we'll call it 70 cents. So from a USD perspective, it's up. But from an Ether perspective, I can't get back a whole Ether. So if I sell my change coins right now, I could sell them at a loss and get back less Ether. But Ether's up against the dollar. So how should my tax be treated actually when I'm selling at a loss? I'm it's kind of crappy. I'm getting less Ether than when I started. So that's not really cool. But then if I wanted to sell the Ether to dollar, I'd end up with more money. So Is it a tax gain or a tax loss? I guess it depends on what currency we're measuring the tax gain and loss in. And if I never move back to fiat currency, is that liable for tax? Or am I liable for every trade, and therefore, because my trade was at a loss from 1 ether to, let's say, zero point 0.8 ether, does that mean I'm at a loss or I'm at a gain relative to dollar, or is it not relative to dollar?
So when will we know that? When will we know the answer to that, to how that's going to be handled?
Well, I think every country at the moment is doing its own thing. And I think the only thing I can recommend is stay aware of your own country's tax rules and laws and how they're asking you to report it. And just make sure you keep good records. It does get complicated because, I've thrown another question around to some other people myself and said, so I'm mining coins. And every month I get a certain number of coins, call it for free, for mining. But actually it's got an electric cost associated with it in my house. But how do I record or confirm the amount of cost of my electricity bill to offset the free coins I received? Do the coins have a tax implication because I mined them? I honestly don't know the answer.
Yeah, well, I'd imagine in the U.S., technically, if that's the case, then and you're creating money from something like that, you have to establish a company. So you'd have to establish an LLC, and that would just basically be the company would be making money.
Except that who do you know that's mining and running a company to do mining at home?
Exactly, and that's why I'm asking you this is. So I mean, I just care about me, man. I don't care.
Hold on to that Super Bowl ring. Don't sell it. Don't sell it for Bitcoin. No, to be honest, I think it does vary by country to country, and there's a lot of things that these governments just aren't aware of and they haven't thought through. I mean, I'm just giving you 2 examples of things I'm really aware of, and behind that, there's lots more examples of things I can point out that haven't been thought of. But, the reality is that the governments are going to have to get to the point where they understand how crypto works, because here's another really weird one. If I buy coins on any one place, I have to pay a price, I get a certain quantity, and I did it on a certain date. And those are the 3 variables that you use for buying shares. But when you transfer coins from a wallet to a wallet, the only thing that transfers is the quantity. The price and the date of purchase are lost when you send the coins from wallet to wallet. That might be what you could call a flaw in the way the blockchain is currently developed, because you have no historical records and no way of recording or verifying. On the other hand, if I'm receiving the coins from you, I wouldn't want to know the date that you paid it and how much you paid for it. All I want is the coins. But if it's from my own self, I'd want to know that. So just that alone is already kind of an interesting problem, because how do you kind of rectify you have to move the coins from A to B to C? How do I start to keep track of it all? I have to start keeping records of where I had all my different coins in all the different places. And yes, you should do that, but it gets very messy. And that's the problem. And even when you go onto some of the exchanges, they only have the data for sometimes 30 to 60 days, and then their records don't even show it anymore, which means if you didn't write it down on a piece of paper, you've got another problem, which is how to prove it. And then you have to start asking for them to start pulling records to show it for you. So, this is all
the curse, right?
What's
because
that?
That's the gift and the curse, right?
It is.
That's why it was created originally, so that transactions like that couldn't be traced. I mean, that's why it was set up in that way, right?
Quite possibly, yeah. So it's weird because I wouldn't be transferring Microsoft shares to you, but I could send you Bitcoin or Dash. But if I were able to transfer Microsoft shares to you, the only thing I'd want to do is send you 100 shares of Microsoft. And guess what? What happens if Microsoft has some great news the next day and the shares double? And then I'm saying, oh crap! If I've only kept the shares, I would be so much wealthier now. But that is the equivalent mentality of Bitcoin, right? It's if I send you something, there's always the risk of it going up and down. So, but being able to, from the tax perspective, being able to track it, it's really on the individual. And because it's your wallet, it's your responsibility. You have to track it and keep hold of it all yourself anyway. That's just the way it is.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that, because we were talking about that. We've talked about that before with the fact that it is so volatile, and it could go up or go down so much in a day that people potentially are a lot more hesitant to actually use it, as opposed to just buying it and selling it, like buying it and holding it like they would a share in a company.
Right.
So how do you see that affecting global adoption of crypto? Do you think that it won't necessarily become mainstream until that volatility dies down and people feel better about using it?
There's different aspects of mainstream. So let's break down what we mean by mainstream. If you look at it from the standpoint of venture capital, the amount of money that was raised in venture capital in the first half of 2017 was greater than all venture capital done in the same period of time. So the venture capital money that's traditionally, venture capitalists or investors or angel investors that will invest in companies, that the amount of money that's invested in crypto has absolutely, dwarfed typical traditional venture capital money as investment. So from that aspect of mainstream, crypto is alive and kicking. It's just enormous by comparison. If you look at it from the mainstream aspect of investment, there are exchanges claiming to be getting 100,000 new user requests per day. So that's another aspect that tells me it's pretty well alive. If you talk about it in terms of can I spend it or hold it as an investment? Well, remember, Bitcoin is both. You can spend it, you can invest in it, but equally, you can use it as collateral for a loan. So there's actually a number of different ways that you could treat or use Bitcoin in that context or other coins. So what I see is this is just generally part of a new paradigm shift. And as people get more and more comfortable with it, there's going to be, ebbs and flows of people getting in, people getting scared. Is it too high? Have I missed the boat? And everyone's saying, no, you haven't missed the boat. It's got lots of potential to go up further. And then people pull back and then they get in again. There's lots of targets of Bitcoin as a single currency going up to 20,000, 50,000, 100,000. That's not even a question amongst many investors as far as, analysts or investors out there saying that they believe that's where it goes based on the volumes and based on the supply demand curve. But equally, to your point, how can I spend it if it's going to go up? And the answer is, if you had bought Bitcoin in 2009 when it first came out or 2010 and you're sitting on tons of it, well, actually, relatively speaking, everything seems awfully cheap because you have a lot of Bitcoin and the Bitcoin's gone up to, 14, 15, 16,000 and they got it at 10 cents. So I suppose from that perspective, it's like, what's a couple $100 to spend with a little bit of Bitcoin? No big deal to me. And somebody that just has 1.4 Bitcoin might be saying, I really don't want to use this to spend it, but I would be willing to use it for collateral on a loan to make some percentage more Bitcoin. So I think it depends on the user and how they view it individually. I don't think we could blanket it for everybody and say this is how everybody wants to do it.
Yeah, I guess that comes back to me just wanting to know how it affects me because I'm that user that, and I think that actually probably is pretty typical that most people in the U.S. right now, maybe that's even an ignorant statement to say most people, but most people that I interact with are in that range of just having a couple of Bitcoin or a fraction of a Bitcoin.
Right.
And so, it's kind of tough for people. They're just kind of holding, just saying like, oh, well, I'm skeptical, but we'll see what happens and we'll hold on to it. But you've already touched on all of those points that kind of back this up even if there's government regulation, even if their government makes their own coin, even any of these types of things, that's actually potentially a good thing. That's cryptocurrency as a whole will still be moving forward and be becoming what it's going to become.
Yeah.
And that doesn't necessarily mean that, I guess potentially along the way, things will change and values will go up and values will go down. But there's almost no denying that it's here to stay and it's becoming the future of payment.
I suppose if you see, a currency come from a government, whether it's a cryptocurrency or a block of countries that join together to create a single cryptocurrency, doesn't that in some ways give more credence or more, confirmation that crypto is here to stay? And actually, in doing so, aren't they really giving more valuation to, not just Bitcoin, but other cryptocurrencies that actually this is not going away?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. And I think that's what we were talking about before. And that's the important distinction between talking about Bitcoin and talking about crypto.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So crypto, Bitcoin was just the first Bitcoin was the first Bitcoin. Bitcoin was the first Bitcoin. Now Bitcoin was the first cryptocurrency that was out, but that's not to say there won't be others that follow. And there have been now nearly 2,000 plus cryptocurrencies that have been created as a result of companies launching businesses as layers on top of Ethereum or as new platforms or as new solutions for a variety of verticals. And I don't see that stopping. I see it accelerating. So there's going to be a lot of these companies that don't make it, wrong idea, bad team, poorly executed, all the typical things of startups that have problems. But at the same time, the technology, the platform, the way it works, none of that stuff is really like slowing down. I think there's just people are looking for more creative ways to use the technology to create a distributed environment to allow people to work and operate in a much more fluid and organized way instead of things being, defined by country or by border. It's a borderless environment built around what's called consensus, meaning people get together and agree things on a global basis, which is actually quite nice because it really allows us as a society to work together in ways that we never thought possible. And just in my world of being in crypto, I've been on the phone with people from Japan, Russia, El Salvador, various parts of Europe. It's so amazing for me to be able to connect with so many people from all around the world just because of crypto that I would otherwise never have had an opportunity to talk to and connect with.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that I think that it for the casual user or for the peripheral, the person that's kind of on the periphery of this type of thing, I think it's hard not to get excited about the potential and about crypto in general. But I think that from this entire discussion, I think one of the things that I've gotten out of it is that, if you it's one thing to get excited about crypto and start understanding it and start wrapping your mind around the potential to use it and how it can be used. And it's another thing to kind of jump into the market right now of buying and selling and trading and getting into the different altcoins and buying to hold. That's a totally different thing. And
that's fair. And look, investing is not for everybody. Some people just aren't comfortable with the whole buying and selling. And there are other ways to go about it. I mean, there are over 120 different asset management or hedge funds out there that are creating platforms to enable people to just buy the coins and let a fund manager manage it for you. So I don't think that everyone needs to be worried about, having to buy and trade it. There are other ways to do it where you can ask for help from other firms that are out there. And, certainly we could try to help them identify those in a future episode if people were interested and they just give us a shout out and let us know. Then we could even look at an episode around just trying to help them identify places where they could put their money and just trust that there's fund managers out there doing it for a living that are professionals trying to help.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was joking with a friend the other day about how, there's probably traders on Wall Street that, are just so frustrated because, they work so hard and they analyze a market and they dig in and they find a great stock and they find, and they go and they tell their investors and they invest and then that stock does great and goes up $1. You know what I mean? Or like goes up $20 and that's the big win. And it doesn't really matter unless the investor has millions of dollars in it.
Yeah, that's right. And that is a problem.
Meanwhile, the casual guy is getting on his computer and buying some Bitcoin. It's going up $5,000 in a week.
Yeah. And like I said, this is part of it's part of a user growth take on story more than it is about anything else. And there are, analysts out there who have actually pointed out to the fact that the growth story of Bitcoin and the user growth of Bitcoin can really be compared to that of the social media platforms like Facebook or even Twitter, with user growth that was sort of going from flat to suddenly going like on a really steep curve for a very long period of time. And that's merely a fact of, I tell my friend and they tell 10 friends and so on, like the commercial from the 70s in the States for some hair product. And it's really like that. I mean, as you start to see that kind of spiral, that network effect of people telling people, that's what we're seeing with Bitcoin and cryptocurrency is a user growth story more than about the coin value. But of course, they're tied together because as more people are buying it, there's a squeeze on the amount available. And of course, you're probably holding your coins. I'm certainly holding mine. And many other people are doing the same. And that, of course, is what's driving the price up. So, it's a really weird one because it's like an investment on one hand, and it's like a comparison of user growth to Facebook on the other. And it's kind of just sits someplace in the middle. It just crosses over so many boundaries of its money. It's used for loans. It's used for a security. It's used as cash. It's used for mortgages. It's used to buy a house. It's used as an investment vehicle. And it's got a user growth like Facebook. It's kind of like, have you seen that anywhere else? It's really a whole different paradigm.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's kind of empowered the, to use a football analogy, it's empowered the armchair quarterback, the guy that really doesn't know a lot about it, that has the potential to get, to jump on an exchange and buy some cryptocurrency and make a lot of money. And then now all of a sudden they're the expert and they're giving their opinion on things. And then that opinion is spreading. And I feel like there's a lot of misinformation out there that just has to do with, like you said, with user adoption and kind of how that goes.
And there is a lot of fake news coming out as well. By the way, were you just saying you're going to bring a quarterback onto one of the next episodes so we could have some fun with him?
I actually do. I have a really good friend that used to be, he played with me in New England, and he's a coach at Texas Tech. A college coach at Texas Tech University, and he invested in a mining operation where he just put in, I think it was 50 grand, and he invested in this mining operation, and they agreed to give him X percentage of everything that they mined. And that was, I think, 6 months ago, and I think he's up to maybe 15 Bitcoin or something like that now that they've given him.
Well, why don't you reach out to him separately and see if he'd like to jump in on another call with us, and we can just talk to him about, in our mining call or a future call, just about what it's like to invest in this as someone like you who's starting out new and just jumps in, full steam ahead and just tries something, and what the experience is like. I think it would be interesting to see, but I mean, needless to say, there's other people out there.
Yeah, it would be an interesting conversation because he's the kind of guy that, I think that, and like a lot of people is, I don't know that, I think that there are some people out there that actively don't really want to understand it. You know what I mean? Like they're either fighting it because they have these objections in their head, or they're skeptics, or they see it as something that's more complicated than what they can wrap their mind around.
Yeah.
And so they're kind of going out of their way to avoid learning about it.
Well, I've had a lot of people tell me that it's a Ponzi scheme, and I said, well, if you can give me one example of how this is any form of a Ponzi scheme, of a pyramid, or where I'm encouraging you to take on coins so that someone else can do it, then by all means, please explain it. And I think it's just, for those people who just say that, I often find it's more of the enlightenment about how it actually works. And, for me, when I didn't understand it at the beginning, I just dug in deep. And I said, okay, well, I'm not super techie, but if I can figure out how mining works, the principle of it, if I can build spreadsheets to figure out how to calculate my costs and my losses and my electric bills and how much mining I can make from a certain card, and if I can actually set up my own mining rig, then I'll have a much better appreciation or understanding of actually how it works. And that's why I went through that personal journey, which took me, 2 months to figure it out. But it wasn't like I was doing it full time, but I spent the time to, every day reading a bit, trying to understand it, downloading different software packages. Is it working? Is it not working? Well, I don't know. It's mining, but I don't have any coins yet. But it takes time because you've got to go through cycles before you actually get money. And just trying to verify whether my mining was just like giving somebody else's coin. I mean, I thought, oh my God, I'm mining and maybe someone else is getting the money. I mean, that's the first thing you think because it doesn't show up right away. It's like, how much money did I just give this guy, and who did I give it to? And that's that whole experience, or that journey of going through it before you understand the nuts and bolts of what's going on. But that also gives you the framework of understanding what Bitcoin or coins are doing in general in terms of what mining and confirmations and settlements and transferring money is. That you say, well, I don't see how it's a Ponzi scheme. I'm just sending money to Chas because he won't stop bugging me till I give him $100 worth of Dash. I don't know why you want Dash so badly, by the way.
I'll take anything I can get.
That's a conversation for offline, my friend.
No, I think I could keep asking millions and millions of questions. But this was a really good basis, and I appreciate you taking the time to kind of explain it to a dummy like me.
Not a problem at all. Is there anything else you'd like to know before we disconnect from today's call?
I think that's great. I think anything else that I asked you at this point now, I almost know too much. So anything else that I ask you now would be more specific, and we could probably go way down a rabbit hole.
So I'll throw one thing out there for you that you didn't ask me, which is, where can I spend my Bitcoin?
Yes. So yeah, I'd love to ask you where I could spend my Bitcoin.
Well, how about let's go on Expedia, and you can use some Bitcoin, and you can come fly and see me.
Yeah.
So
you can figure that out. But like we said earlier, I'm that guy that just has a couple of Bitcoin and wants to, you're gonna have to pry it from my dead, lifeless fingers to take away the prospect of making a bunch more money on the Bitcoin that I'm holding.
You could probably fly first class with one Bitcoin and have an amazing flight. Anyway, needless to say, Expedia accepts Bitcoin. You transact the Bitcoin off of a Coinbase account, but they do it. Microsoft uses Bitcoin for spending on various forms of games. You could even use Bitcoin on Overstock. So those are some of the more popular ones. Now, here's a few weird ones I've kind of been doing some research and I found out about. So here's one for you. Did you know that if you're in the States and you're on Dish Network, you could pay with Bitcoin?
No, I had no idea.
And okay, here's an even more obscure one. If you're deciding to move, then you could call Roadway Moving Company and you could use Bitcoin to pay for your move.
That's awesome.
And of course, there's a running theme in all the podcasts about pizza. So of course, I had to throw this in because we've had some conversations previously about Papa John's and the guy that used a bunch of Bitcoins to buy a pizza. And of course, nowadays that guy would have been worth millions had he not spent the Bitcoin on a pizza. But there is one called Pizza for Coins. And it is a way to actually buy pizza with coins.
There's no way I'd allow myself to become one of those BuzzFeed articles about a guy that bought pizza with Bitcoin.
No, well, fair enough. But anyway, I just thought I'd leave you with those as just sort of takeaway thoughts. But there are more and more platforms that are accepting not just Bitcoin, but other platforms. And of course, if you don't want to spend the Bitcoin directly, just put them on your debit credit card and you could spend it away that way too. But don't ask me the tax implications on that one because I have no idea. But certainly there's going to be some interesting things that come out of it. Anyway, thank you, Chas. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on here today. Remember, people, that Chas runs a company called VitalityRX.com. It's great for getting some help around concierge services in medicine. He's a great guy, so don't hesitate to look him up if you're in Los Angeles. Listen in next week, everyone, on the Coin Chat, where we talk about, is it too late to buy Bitcoin? To the moon. Until next time.